Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moffman coming at you with another AP Gov video. Today's video is taking a look at topic 3.11, government responses to social movements. Now, in this particular video, we're starting to take a look at the history of the fight for civil rights for African Americans. And of course, that struggle has parallels to the struggle for civil rights for many other minorities in our history, but also has some unique challenges as well. And we're going to be picking up our look at this fight for civil rights for African Americans with the end of the Civil War and the beginning of the period known as Reconstruction. Now, in this period of Reconstruction, there's going to be an attempt by Congress to try to undo many aspects of what had defined Southern life in terms of its social strata, with keeping Black Americans at the very bottom with as few to no rights as possible. So we're going to be seeing in the Reconstruction period the passage of a few key constitutional amendments. One of those, of course, being the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery, but also the 14th and the 15th Amendments. And the 14th in particular is going to be home to a number of important, notable protections. And let's go ahead and take a look at these. If you take a look at 14th Amendment Section 1, and this is where we're going to be looking at for what we're doing here today, it says that all persons born in or naturalized in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. This is important to say that basically anybody that's born on U.S. soil is automatically a citizen, regardless of any other circumstances pertaining to that person's birth. It doesn't say anything about having to be the child of a citizen in order to become a citizen if you're born on U.S. soil. Doesn't matter the legal status of that parent if you are born on U.S. soil. Bottom line, if you're born on U.S. soil, you are an American citizen, period, end of story. And this was important because when you're talking about African Americans, since the legal slave importation laws had been abolished since 1808, just about basically everyone that was previously enslaved had been born on U.S. soil. And so this would automatically basically make everybody that was formerly enslaved now a U.S. citizen. So that's right off the bat a blanket guarantee of citizenship. But of course it doesn't stop there. It also says, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. So basically what this means is that if you are a U.S. citizen, you get to enjoy the rights of a U.S. citizen in every state. A state cannot take that away. Now, this was put in place because there was a clear fear that southern states, now that blacks were citizens, would try to come up with ways to limit the rights that come with that citizenship. And so this is explicitly stating that, you know, any benefits that you enjoy from being a U.S. citizen cannot be taken away by the state. It also says that the state shall not deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Now, we've already had this protection done in the Fifth Amendment, but that due process protection only pertained, as far as the Supreme Court was concerned, at the federal level. Now, with this 14th Amendment, it is expressly protected at the state level as well. And once again, this was done out of fears that with Black Americans now being freed and now being citizens, that there might be attempts by Southern governments that were not particularly pleased that blacks were now citizens, would deny Black Americans due process. And remember, due process is the series of procedures that the government must follow if they wish to deny you life, liberty, or property. In other words, they can't just arbitrarily throw you in prison. The government can't just arbitrarily fine you. The government cannot just arbitrarily, execute you. There has to be a series of steps along that way, including, for example, like a warrant to search one's property, the writ of habeas corpus, so you know why you're being arrested, a fair trial, etc., etc., etc. And then lastly, in the 14th Amendment, it specifically denies states the ability to deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. And this is the most important part of the 14th Amendment as it pertains to the idea of civil rights, because this is the cornerstone of civil rights in America. It's saying that everybody is entitled to equal protection under the law, equal treatment under the law. Now, once again, this was designed by Congress with a clear recognition that, Southern whites were not just, automatically, now that the war was over and slavery had ended and blacks are now citizens, that there would be a sense that, Southerners would stop being racist with regards to black Americans. And so this was done intentionally to basically strip racism and discrimination as applied to the law. So when we do talk about civil rights, if you don't have the equal protection laws, you don't really have the protection of civil rights, because that's what civil rights is all about. Civil rights is the idea of having the ability to be treated equally under the law by the government. Now, this, of course, has been applied to various groups, not just based on race or ethnicity, but, other things, such as gender and sexual orientation and age and, things like that. But this is the cornerstone. This is, in many respects, the big bang, if you will, of where civil rights protections come from. So you can see here early on, following the end of the Civil War and with the emergence of Reconstruction, that Congress was very serious about trying to not just end slavery, but create a new America where black Americans who had, commonly been previously enslaved are now going to have a real opportunity to enjoy what it means to be an American, to not just, grant freedom for black Americans, but to be able to enjoy the same opportunities as everybody else. And really, if you look back at it historically, I mean, this is amazingly progressive in terms of what Congress is trying to do. Very bold, very noble, and once again, very progressive. Unfortunately, in many respects, it's going to be too progressive for what the Supreme Court and, of course, Southern white state governments are going to be willing to accept. So understand that despite these entrenched protections in the 14th Amendment, you're going to see the Supreme Court and Southern white governments try to do their very best to find loopholes in that language and try to get around that language to still maintain a sense of white superiority in the South, politically, economically, socially, etc. And this is also going to be applying to voting. In the 15th Amendment, which is going to come out 2 years after the 14th Amendment, it states that the right to vote cannot be denied on account of race or conditions of previous servitude. Once again, Congress was very much, cognizant of the fact that just because blacks are now free and blacks are now citizens, they were very cognizant that Southern white governments are almost certainly not going to have any interest in letting black Americans vote and participate in this American democracy. And to try to, counteract that, that's where the 15th Amendment comes into play. It basically says that, you can't take away someone's right to vote in this case because you're black. And no, they were also cognizant enough to know that Southern white governments are going to, even if the rule is just you can't deny someone the right to vote on account of race, that they would try to find some end around tied to the issue of slavery. And so they specifically put in the language of the 15th Amendment that the right to vote cannot be denied on account of previous servitude. In other words, you cannot be denied the right to vote because you had previously been a slave. So that cannot be used as a block to voting. So once again, like many components of the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment is very progressive. It's forward-thinking. It's, trying its very best, seemingly, to try to get black Americans to enjoy the most important of the rights that American citizens get to enjoy, and that's the right to vote. But as I said previously, Southern white governments, especially once Reconstruction ends and the Union troops are taken back, Southern governments are left to their own devices again, you're going to see these Southern white Democrat Redeemer governments quickly take hold and create policies that are technically not in violation of the 15th Amendment, especially as far as the Supreme Court was concerned at the time, but were clearly designed to get around the 15th Amendment, no question about it. And these are pretty diabolical, pretty despicable, slick ways to try to achieve this idea of keeping blacks disenfranchised. And they include examples such as literacy tests. A literacy test would be commonly found in many southern states that would stipulate that if you wanted to vote, you had to pass a test to show that you are literate, especially with regards to government. And note, this is not just basically asking, who's the head of the executive branch or whatever. But these are very long, exhaustive tests. This is one from Alabama in 1965, the last of their literacy tests. And they had, obscure, if not inane questions that folks would have to respond to, like, asking, how many of the original colonies had to approve the Constitution for it to be ratified? Or, asking, does enumeration affect the income tax levied on citizens in various states? Or, a person opposed to swearing in an oath may say what instead? These are very obscure things that by far the average American would never know. And if you're talking about a population of Americans like African Americans at this time who were, unfortunately the victims of tremendous educational discrimination, many of these folks having been former slaves, had, in some cases barely literate, you're not going to know, for example, what the word enumeration means. And so the chances of you being able to pass this test are going to be slim to none. And that's by design. So you're going to be seeing, literacy tests as a very effective way to keep blacks from voting. But it doesn't end there. You also would have the creation of poll taxes where you'd have to pay to vote. It would be commonly in today's money about $20 to be able to go vote. And if you were someone that was extremely poor, and remember the vast majority of black Americans during this time period are going to be sharecroppers, making, pennies per hour in many cases, and not going to be able to have much money at all. And if in today's money you would have to pay $20 to go vote, and you had a choice between $20 to vote and $20 to feed your family, that's not going to be a tough choice. You're going to use that money to feed your family, and white Southern governments knew it. And so the idea was that this is going to keep black folks from voting because they couldn't afford to do so. You also had what were called grandfather clauses put in many state rules regarding voting, which stipulated that in order to be able to vote, you had to prove that your grandfather was legally able to vote. Now, if you're white, that's not going to be a problem because, if you were white, there was no previous history of servitude in your family, anything remotely close to contemporary times. But in the late 1800s, if you were black in America, chances are your grandfather was a slave. And if your grandfather was a slave, you did not have that right to vote. So bottom line, if you couldn't prove that your grandfather could vote, well then guess what? You can't vote either. And this was designed intentionally to keep black folks from voting. And this is especially despicable because the 15th Amendment specifically says you cannot take away the right to vote on account of previous servitude. But what this is doing is it's not denying someone the right to vote because they had been a slave, but because their grandfather had been a slave. So this is pretty slick and evil stuff. You also saw the creation of what were called white primaries. The idea being, of course, a primary or primaries are elections that are done by political parties to decide who their nominees are going to be for the general election for various offices. It could be president, governor, whatever. And so what political parties would do, particularly the Democratic Party in those days, would create rules in these state primaries that would say that you could not participate in voting in the primary unless you were white. And you might think, well, isn't that a direct violation of the 15th Amendment? Well, the way that it's going to be interpreted is that, well, the 15th Amendment's protection from being denied the right to vote on account of race is only for the general election, the actual voting of the person that's going to be elected to office, not the primary. Primary winners don't become office holders directly. They just become nominees of parties to run for elected office. Once again, very slick, pretty despicable. And as you can see here, there's going to be a number of diabolical ways that southern state governments are going to try to effectively keep blacks from voting. And it will be very effective. You're going to be seeing in some states that 99% of black Americans are not going to be able to vote, despite the explicit language in the 15th Amendment to try to make sure that black Americans could vote. Okay? We're going to leave it there for now. When we come back next time, we're going to talk about the shortcomings under the 14th Amendment with regards to Jim Crow segregation in society and get into some important milestones in the fight for black American civil rights. So we'll see you then next time. Bye-bye.